G'day everyone. I love getting a little bit of interaction before I get rolling. So it's a really good turnout. We've got like 40 people here, which is just awesome. And I thought I'd start with wrapping up, well, who the hell am I? And why would I be talking to you? And why should you listen to me for the next, 3 hours? Because that's how long this talk is. If you didn't know that, that's fine. I might be able to cut a little bit back, but we'll see how we go. So I run a company called reInteractive, and my name's Mikel Lindsaar, and if you look at that spelling, I get called Mikel a lot. Don't call me Mikel. It's just Mike with an L on the end. It's really simple. But yeah, there you go. We run reInteractive. reInteractive is a team of about 15 now, I think, and we've got 12 full-time Rails developers from Australia in our company. And that's a lot of Rails developers. It might not seem like a lot, but in our community, that is a lot of Rails developers. Because Rails allows you to produce a lot of code. Now, for the business people in here, I am going to do a little bit of a what is Rails thing in a second, so don't glaze over too much, just accept that it's something that you use to build a website with. It's good enough. I do blog, I'm on Twitter. I'm one of the Rails core committers. So there's about 20 people worldwide who are allowed to make changes to Rails, and I'm one of them, so that's cool. It means that if we have clients that have a specific problem, we can actually write a patch that fixes it in Rails worldwide. Not many companies can claim that, so I work very hard to get that. But yeah, it's a good thing. I think I'm the only Australian, I'm pretty sure. There's one guy in New Zealand, and everyone else is everywhere else. But Rails is a very big ecosystem. In fact, the number of people that have contributed to Rails, because it's open source, right, which means it's free for anyone to contribute, the number of contributors is something like 5,000 people worldwide, which is massive, because it means a lot of people care about it and a lot of people are contributing to it, so it's not going away, which is important. My next question was, who are you? But we've already got the half web development, half business people. Let me ask another question. Who has used Rails? Okay, 4 or 5 people, good. Who has a good idea of what Rails is? Okay, about half the room. Good. So then, let me tell you, in case you've forgotten, what is Ruby on Rails and why should you care? Well, first off, Ruby on Rails is made up of 2 words, Ruby and Rails. So what Ruby is a programming language. If you've heard of Java, PHP, C#, .NET, that's what Ruby is. It's just a way to tell a computer to do something. HTML is also a programming language. CSS is a programming language of some sort, right? It tells a computer to achieve something. CSS is more of a declarative language, but anyway, it still tells the computer to do something. It makes it look nice, or makes the page look nice, or something like that. So that's what Ruby is. Now, Ruby has a really interesting background in that the guy who made it, his name is Mats, and I'll cover this a bit later, but he developed it with the sole purpose of making developers happy, which is really quite unique. No other language is built with that purpose in mind. And I'll tell you why that's important a bit later in the chat, about hour 2.5. So what's Ruby on Rails? Well, the guy who made Ruby on Rails, his name is David Heinemeier Hansen. That name is really hard to say fast, so everyone converts it down to just DHH. He created Rails because he was a PHP programmer and he got sick of writing PHP. And the problem was that most PHP applications around the place, every time you start a new PHP application, you basically start afresh, and the directory structure can be different between applications, and every new PHP application you look at, you have to get your head around how has the programmer structured this? Where have they put this part and where have they put that part and where is it all? So if you're a new developer going into a PHP application, you might spend an hour or 2 just getting your head around how the thing works. He was a little sick of that. And what he wanted was, he wanted to solve all the easy problems already, and then make the really hard problems easier to solve. And that's why he developed Rails. And what Rails is a framework. So if you think you've got Ruby underneath, which tells the computer what to do, Rails is a layer on top of that, which interprets your wishes, if you like, and then converts it into more complex Ruby, and then the Ruby tells the computer what to do. So it's another layer of abstraction. And it means you can write very complex websites in a very short amount of code. So instead of writing, say, 1,000 lines of Java, you might write 100 lines of Ruby, or 50 lines of Ruby, Or an extreme example, I've seen 1,000 lines of Java going to 5 lines of Ruby. This is all very possible. It might not seem real, but it's the way it works. I'll also explain why that happens. So that's a really basic summary of what Ruby on Rails is as a framework. Other examples, if you're in Java, you would have seen Grails. In PHP, you would have seen Cake PHP. If you're a Python developer, which is another language, seen Django. There's a lot of these frameworks around. Now, we chose Rails about 4 years ago to concentrate on, or 3 years ago when we started. And the reason for that is that it's one of the fastest ways to get a web application from concept to production. And we try and deliver that at reInteractive. That's what we do. We'll get a client come to us and say, we have this concept. How do we get that to market in the shortest amount of time, in the least amount of money, obviously, because when you're a startup, you don't have money to burn, and we help them do that. And we have done that for quite a few clients, and I can talk about those too. The other thing with this talk, if I run past something you don't understand, we do have 3 hours to burn. Just put your hand up and ask a question. I am joking about that, obviously. But just put your hand up, shout it out, and I'll elaborate. So, how do I get to market first with Ruby on Rails? So, who here is actually a startup? Good, most of them are. So when we're looking at doing a startup or a new website, we look at trying to handle 5 broad steps in getting to market, right? You've got your concept, you need to evaluate whether or not that concept works, you need to develop that concept, you need to launch that concept, and then you need to iterate over what you've done. And they're really broad, simple steps, right? What I want to show you is why these 3 steps here are evaluation, development, and launch, are really well suited to Rails, and especially development. And if you're looking at a startup and you've got a budget of this much, about this much of it is going to be in these last steps, right? The concept is the smallest chunk. So what you want to do when you're starting a web-based startup, obviously if you're not starting a web-based startup, don't use Ruby on Rails because you don't need a website. But if you're starting that web-based startup, you need to optimize where your money is going to be spent to get the most features out for the money you've got to spend. It's pretty obvious. And that's why Rails can really come into its own. The other really cool thing about Rails is any one of you could learn how to build a basic Rails app, and I'll even show you where you can go to learn that. So the first step, obviously, we're just going to go through each of these. We're going to spend a little bit more in the development area because that's one of the biggest reasons why you choose Rails. So the first one, obviously, is concept. This is very hard to get right, obviously. If this was really easy, we'd all be millionaires instantly. So first off, you've got to figure out what your product is. You know, is it a clone of YouTube and Facebook for hamsters? What is the product, right? And once you get that product worked out, you need to figure out who your customer is. I mean, all this sort of stuff can be covered in other talks, but once you've got your product out, you need to figure out who your customers are. And the most important thing that we ask our clients when they're coming to us is how are they going to get money for it? And it's in fact one of the first questions I ask any new development or startup developer who comes to me and says, I want to build this product. My question back to them is, well, how are you going to get money to pay for your product? You know? And it's actually quite funny. I've had a few people go, oh, well, actually I haven't. I mean, you know, well, we've got blah, and it's really vague. And at that point, I sort of tell them to go away and come back when they've got it worked out, or I suggest they go to some talks or meetups, or I send them some links. Because at the end of the day, hiring someone like us obviously costs money. And our goal when we're creating a website for a customer is what's the least amount of work that we can charge for, like, and get done, that's going to produce for you enough of a product that you can start billing your customers and get money in for it. And then when we're developing your product, we're targeting that basic size, whatever that size may be. $50,000 worth of work, $100,000 worth of work, $200,000 worth of work, depends on the startup. But what is that gap, right? Because as soon as you start charging for your product and you can get money in, at that point you can afford to get your own staff, which we actually help train sometimes. You can get us to do more work, whatever, but at that point you're viable. And if we're not focused on that first, what's the basic concept we need to get to MVP, then we're wasting money, really. Because what will happen is that every product has a feature list which goes to the floor and out the door and around the street and ends up somewhere in the bottom of the harbour, right? The feature list will always grow longer. The trick is picking out the items on the feature list that are going to return money, right? How is this going to invest? Because you're investing money, right? Whenever you invest money, you should invest it with a viewpoint of, I'm putting this much beans in, how many beans do I get back for that investment? And web development, everything else is no different. So our developers will talk to you about your concept with us when we're doing the project management and getting it running and stuff in the later steps, not here obviously, because you'd be doing this. But we'd be working with you in the project management steps to work out what are those minimum viable products. It's called an MVP. A lot of you probably have heard about it, the minimum viable product. But really what an MVP is the features that you can get money for, right? How can you get a return? How can you get it to the next stage? On some startups, the MVP is getting it to a point where you then can get more funding. But even that's still an MVP, right? You're building it to a point where you can get money in. So if you think of an MVP as the point where you get your product that it starts becoming viable, that's what we want to build. And that's what Ruby on Rails is very well optimized for. The other key thing is sometimes people confuse, I mean, I've seen this. This talk isn't really on how to pick a startup subject or startup business, but I've seen this. A lot of people get confused with their customer and their target market. Because quite often the target market is not the person paying you. And you've got to really get your head around that. Because, you know, if you're marketing Facebook for hamsters, your target market might be 7-year-olds. But really, are they your customer? I mean, are they going to pay you money? Who's actually going to pay you money? Is it the advertiser? Is it the parents? And getting your head around that and how to engage them, very important. Anyway, enough about that. Once you've got that concept down, you need to get some evaluations done. Get out there and survey. Again, we're not really at the Rails stage, but we are at a stage where someone like reInteractive or another company that you retain can help you. And the reason for that is what you can do is you can create a wireframe mock-up, and it's one of the things that we can create, and we do create quite a lot of. And what a wireframe is, it's just we call them medium fidelity mock-ups, right? They're clickable, they're usable, and you can actually show it to people. I can actually show you an example if you would like. Let me show you an example. And you can use this as a tool. And this evaluation step is very, very valuable. The other really cool thing about this is that when you're trying to come up with development of a web design, who's ever had the situation where they've got a really good concept of what they wanted, and they tell someone, this is what I want, and they go and develop it, and it's nothing like what they wanted? I mean, it happens, right? So what this does is it gives you all a common reality. And you can say to the developer, I want it to look like that, right? And to give you an example, that's what the finished result looked like, right? From that. So it went back and forth a few times. There was a bit of a change that went through and discussions on how it all happened, but pretty close. And the homepage, same sort of thing. Wait for it to come up. And then that's what the final site looks like. And that obviously is where the text changes. So you can create a mock-up like this in your evaluation step. And what you want to do in that evaluation step is, ideally, get those wireframes and go find some buyers. Go find people that actually want to pay you money for this thing. And once you know you can find people that want to pay you money, then go ahead and invest in it. This also helps you if you're doing an investment round. If you can go to a possible investor and show them a working copy of your website, they'll go, wow, I can see how this works, or they can get some reality with it. And that website obviously doesn't work, right? The wireframe only looks like it works. It doesn't matter what you type into the login field, you'll log in, right? But it means you can strip up an orchestrated step-by-step guide through the site. So, what's that got to do with Ruby on Rails? Well, I'm very glad you asked me that question. It's because once we've got that wireframe, we need to develop the thing, right? So you've worked out what your site is, your concept, you've evaluated it, you've built your wireframe, you've got it all running, you've hired reInteractive to do all of that, obviously. And now you're good. I just got my $100,000 seed fund, or $200,000 or 50 grand, I want to actually build a site. It's a good idea to talk to someone like us before you go and ask for money, because you might not know how much money you need. I know it sounds crazy, but I've had startups come to me and go, I want to build this! And I go, great, what's your budget? And they go, this! And I go, that doesn't fit. And they go, oh, can't you build it anyway? I'll give you like, half of it. No. So we generally don't do co-equity stuff. I think once in 3 years I've been tempted. And the reason is that as soon as you go into co-equity, it becomes a different relationship. And we want to make sure we're delivering the highest quality and the best of everything, and that's what we do. But, if you have a really good idea, you can just call me and talk about it, and I will give you free advice. It's not a problem. It's part of what I do. I'm at a lot of events. Just ask. And I can usually give you ballparks. In fact, I wrote a blog post called How Much Will My Website Cost? On our website. If you want to go look at that, Google Mikel Lindsaar, How Much Will My Website Cost? And it gives you a really rough breakdown on how to figure it out and what sort of ballparks you're in. So you can have a look at that. So then Rails helps us do this development step. And how does it do that? Well, the first thing is Ruby's got a very high development speed. So before, when I mentioned the 1,000 lines of Java to 100, well, if you only have to write 1/10 of the amount of code, it's going to take you less time to type it, no matter how good you are. It also means the less code you type, the less bugs you write. So a software bug is where you write a bit of software and it doesn't do what you plan it to do and it does something else. Well, one solution to that is write less software. And in the Ruby on Rails code base, actually, I hold the singular international record of the most number of lines of code deleted from Ruby on Rails. So my net contribution to Rails is something like minus 27,000 lines of code, which I'm really proud of. It's got like top contributors, it's 5,000 lines, 2,000 lines, 1,000 lines, and then it's just got ... Mikel Lindsaar minus 27,000. So that's pretty cool, but the net result of doing that was the number of bugs in Rails reduced, right? Because I got rid of all this code and I made it smaller or compact or extracted it to another service or library or whatever that was tested in its own way. So the less code you write, the better off you're going to be. The other thing about Rails is that it actually just reads like English. You can go, if this, then that, and it's just simple English. And in fact, any one of you in this room, I could sit down for 10 minutes, have you read a long Ruby on Rails program, and after 10 minutes you'd be able to describe what it does. Which is a pretty powerful statement. You probably couldn't do that. I know you couldn't do that in C. You might be able to do it in Python, probably. But yeah, it's a very expressive and simple to write language.
It also depends on variables names.
Absolutely, but it's actually funny you say that, the variable names, which is the names you give all the things that you do in the program. One of the things about Ruby is that there is a Ruby way that you do things. And it's an accepted way of doing things. And one of the accepted ways of doing things in Ruby is you make your method names easy to read and understand. And it's just a standard thing. And you can go look at many different Ruby applications on the web, at the open source ones, and they're all sort of programmed in a very similar way, which is very powerful. So yeah, there's the Ruby way. There's also the Rails way. So it's like a martial art, you have to know the Rails way to code Rails. But what that way does is that it's mapped out the most common path for everything, right? So to have a Rails application return a home page that says hi there is literally about 2 lines of code or 3 lines of code. And that's quite powerful, because that's a very common action to show a basic static page. So it's a very small amount of code to make that happen. To make it do something really complex, like insert a video and do this and do this and do this, it's a little bit more code, but it's not as much as what you'd have to write for some of the other languages. So the development speed is incredibly important. The other part of the development part in Ruby on Rails that's important is that we leverage other developers and everything is open source. Now, to give you an example of how much, when I say open source, I mean someone has written code that you can download and use. So if you wanted to post something to Twitter, there is a gem, we call them gems, Ruby gems, hey? Good pun, very funny. It's a gem of information, eh? You can go on puns all day. But have a look at this, 2.29 billion downloads of these software libraries worldwide, right? I've actually got a gem on there that's been downloaded 20 million times that handles email, right? So there's all of these little parts of gems.
Did you charge $1 for that?
Oh God, I wish. See how it's, I mean, if I could charge $1, how much would I earn?
Is it like repository or something like that?
Huh?
Is it like a repository for libraries? Or?
Yeah, this is a library. So when you've got software, if, say you want to send an email from Rails, right? You want to send, thank you for signing up to our service, right? You could sit down and you could handcraft that email in a text code and then write the program that connects to the mail server and then connects to the mail server and dumps the mail into the mail server and then make sure that mail server says it's okay and format the whole thing. Now, if you had to do that, you would go crazy because you'd have to do it every time on a new application. So what someone did, me, is took that code and turned it into a little gem. So we've done it so many times, we turned it into one gem and said, here it is. So now if you want to send an email, you just go mail.new to Michael from Chloe, subject, hi there, body, this is the body, .send, and it's off, right? So that makes it really simple. So there's all these gems that are available for that. If you want to do a Twitter post from Rails, for example, you go gem install Twitter, and then you can go twitter.new, post as my name with my key or my password, and the tweet, send. And that's it, right? So it's like 3 lines of code to send a tweet, and 2.5 lines of that are what the actual tweet is and who you're sending it to, you know. So there's a lot of these gems, and in fact, almost anything you can think of, any sort of integration, if the service has been around for more than a few months, there will be a gem that connects to it and does something to it or handles it in some way, and that's really strong, very powerful.
If gem library gets updated, so
Huh?
what's happening if gem's library gets updated? So application will somehow receive notification, or there is update for this library, or
No, no.
the new version?
No, so when you install the gem, you do something like this, and you install, you say this is the version that I want to depend on, and then you stay on that. It's only when you decide to update that that gem gets updated, and it's updated on a per application basis. So you might have one application that's on mail 2.54 and another one that's still on 2.43. So
you're not receiving any notifications about updates?
you can subscribe if you want. Like, there's a subscribe button and a new update.
Your application, like...
Your application doesn't automatically get it, no. And there's a very important reason for that, because as libraries get updated, the software author might want to change something about it or make an improvement or add a new feature, and that feature might break existing functionality, so you don't want that to automatically update in your
I'm not
cycle.
saying about automatically updates, I'm saying about notification. Like
Yeah.
if environment gets any notification like saying, oh, there's new version, you might have a look and if you want.
Right, yeah. So in WordPress, for example, it does do that, right? You get the little things down the side. You could build that into Rails if you wanted. It wouldn't be very hard. But most Rails applications are large bespoke applications. So the developers working on it will update as they go and as they want. We actually offer a service within reInteractive called Sentinel, and that service will alert you, like we've got humans working on it, it's not just a computer, and we alert you if any of the gems you're using have any sort of security alerts or updates, and we'll proactively help you fix that. But it's not something that's really needed in the Rails community for some reason, and I think the reason is that most of the gems are quite secure, like the language is quite secure. And once you've got the functionality working in the application, you don't really need to update it unless you need to update it. Like if there's some new feature that you want and they just upgraded, then you'd upgrade that. So if you had important stuff, you just go in here and subscribe to the ones you want to know, and then you'd update the app. But no, the application itself won't do that for you.
Sorry, but I think it is a very important question that he asked. How do you maintain control over all your versions and over all your gems that you have within your applications?
I'll show you.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'll show you our website. This is the reInteractive website, and yes, it's written on Rails. And this is called a gem file, and each of these has a gem and then the version number. So what this says is that the gem of Rails we're using, the version is 3.215, and we'll never change that. Like, if a new version comes out, don't upgrade it unless we're very explicit about it. If a 3216 came out, I'd go in and I'd change that to .6, and then I'd do a new deployment, and that would upgrade it. And then down here, there are other things that we actually don't care about the version number. And there are ones that we do care about the version number that we split it out. So this won't update though, unless you do a manual command. So, I mean, I can show you more afterwards. It's quite a technical question. But basically you control all the software libraries in your application and nothing can change without your permission. So that's the most important thing to know. So yeah, we've got this huge library of open source software and pretty much we can link to anything. So you can come to us and say, I want to link to this. I need a LinkedIn feed. Good, gem install LinkedIn. Then you'll get that feed. I need to connect to Facebook. Gem install Facebook API. So all these things exist. Yeah.
Can gems have dependencies of their own? For example, if I need a gem for LinkedIn, it may depend on gem for my.
Yep, that's right.
And
it'll automatically install that for you.
So you
will I know if you have installed it?
Yeah. So there's a file called a gem file lock, which lists every gem that's been installed, and with a dependency tree, and you can go in and fix it.
Install dependency manually.
No, it'll automatically install the dependencies for you. All right, that was quite technical. I hope all the business people aren't asleep. I'm going to go to a new one now, so you can all wake up. No, but the key thing about that for the business people is that there's a massive software out there that will handle 90% of your problems. And that's actually really critical, because when you think about it, if you don't have to program that 90%, then you can focus all your development effort in the 10% that actually makes your application different from everything else. Otherwise, why are you building it, you know? So you can focus in on what's important, not what's trivial or what's been done before. And very powerful feature.
So it's like we're in the 90s, they just spend millions of dollars to develop their sites.
Yeah, that's right.
You can reduce that cost.
Yeah, exactly. If we had to develop all the gems that we use in an average application, like the reInteractive website would have taken 1.5 years instead of 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Yeah.
Are there any randomized controlled trials where people have said, here is the spec, you do it in Python, you do
No.
it in something else, you do it in Ruby?
No one wants to pay it. But, you know, it's anecdotal. All the evidence is anecdotal. You could probably develop just as fast in Python as you can in Ruby. And I'll tell you why I suggest you don't do that. But it's all anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, fair enough.
The other important thing is sometimes I've had a client come to me and say, we want to build blah. And I found out more about who they are, what their connections are and all that sort of thing. And I found out that the best language for them to do it would be PHP. And I've actually told them to go and do it in PHP. So we don't try and make this round hole fit every square peg. And it's important. The other important thing about Ruby is that our community is incredibly strong. If you're learning Ruby or you've had interaction with any Ruby developer or person, you'll find that the community is very welcoming. And we actually have whole programs set up to teach you for free how to program in Rails. There aren't many other environments that do that, or communities that do that. So I'll tell you about a couple of those if you wanted to learn. But the community is massive, and it's very, very friendly. And we actually, the guy who invented Ruby on Rails, his name is Yukihiro Matsumoto. He's a Japanese guy. He created Ruby in the 80s, so it's been around for quite a long time. But there's a saying in the Ruby community that Mats is nice, so we are nice. You know, and he's a really nice guy. I've had dinner with him. He's a really friendly character, and he'll answer any question. Doesn't matter how stupid, you know. And he just sits down with you and he works it out with you. And I've seen him helping someone debug their Ruby code at a conference. You know, this guy gets paid $1 bajillion to do what he does, and he'll spend time helping some new person learn Ruby, which is great. So the whole community does that though. Like if you post a question on a mailing list and you're genuinely in need, someone will answer you and point you in the right direction. And you won't get treated like a pain in the ass newbie or something, you know, which does happen in some other communities, but Ruby's very good that way. So we also have our Install Fest activity. I'll give you the link later, but that's actually one of our initiatives at reInteractive. And what the Install Fest does is you come along with your laptop, you start at about 7 o'clock, 6:37, and by the end of that night, you will have written a Ruby on Rails application that is a blog and have it published online on the internet and usable with a commenting system. And it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, you will get through that in one evening. In fact, you know, we might have a 1% failure rate. It's pretty rare. But we'll actually do that, and we do that every month as just a free service. And then we follow up that with our thing called Development Hub, which actually Ninefold helps sponsor with us. And you just go along to Development Hub, and people are there working on their startups, getting advice, getting help on how to program. And Ruby developers just come after work, professional Ruby developers just come along and sit down just to help you. They don't get paid anything, they just want to come and help. And that's what the whole community's like. So Development Hub and Install Fest. We have a lot of meetups as well, where we just meet and talk about Ruby, Rails, networking, that sort of thing. We worked it out perfectly in the Ruby on Rails community. It used to be held in an office, and then after the meetup finished, we'd all walk to the pub. So we just went, screw that, it's a waste of time, so we just hold it in a pub. So it's on the top floor, so it's all a private venue sort of thing, and it's just a great place to talk and meet and chat and find people who are developers and talk to developers, or find co-founders or whatever you want. The other key part about Ruby that I mentioned earlier is developer happiness. So as I said, Ruby is the only language in existence that was written with the sole purpose of making developers happy. And this is just crazy, you know? So when he wrote it, he didn't care about speed, he didn't care about memory utilization, he didn't care about anything like this. He went, Charles Moore, the guy that predicted computing power doubles every 2 years, he goes, Moore's got my back, that's good. Computers will get fast enough that it won't be a problem. I want to write it for developer happiness. And it's really funny because Ruby programmers really like developing Ruby. Like, they actually really enjoy it. It's a fun pastime. And you don't find many programming languages that engender this sort of reaction from their professional developers. Who's a PHP dev in here? Yeah, I don't want to put your hand up. But no, it's a good example, right? There's a lot of roadblocks and stuff, and PHP has changed many times over the years, and you really need to know your way around it, and if you're expert at it, it's great. But Ruby is optimized for that happiness point. And it does make it a little slower than some other languages, right? If you wanted to write a really complex math calculation program, and that was your startup, go do it in Java, or at least do that bit in Java, or do it in C, or something like that, right? But if you want to have a highly featured website, do it in Ruby at least. Do it with us. We'll do it in Ruby for you. But yeah, it's optimized for developer happiness. So happy developers write more code, and they write less buggy code. They're more interested in making sure that code is beautiful. Like, you'll actually, I've seen this. I've committed stuff to the mail gem on our open source library, and I've had a random developer somewhere in Brazil send me a change request saying, it's not beautiful. This is how we can change it to make it look beautiful. I'm like, what? Does it change the functionality? No, but it looks more beautiful this way. I'm like, okay, fine. But that's what it's like, yeah.
People say the same things, all the same thing about Python.
Yeah, but
including developer happiness.
Python does help you with developer happiness, but it wasn't invented with that sole purpose.
Happiness, but it also goes faster. And,
yeah, totally. Python and Ruby, very similar. Like, if you came to me with a Python application and said, should I rewrite this in Ruby? I'd say no, stick with Python, you've got it. You will get no benefit switching over to Ruby necessarily, right? Just in terms. There's a lot of things about Python that I personally disagree with, is why I'm in Ruby, but, you know, whatever. But yeah, Matt's created it for developer happiness. And Ruby developers are generally happy. I mean, look. Another reason you should use Ruby, it's free! Free as in beer, not speech. So, it's open source. It's not owned by any one person internationally. The DHH, the inventor, curates it, but he actually doesn't own it. The license that's in Ruby on Rails is called an MIT license, and it's this long, and the text is this high. It's 4 lines of text. That's the license for this entire framework. And about 95% of the licenses of all the gems that have ever been written are the same 4 or 5 lines. And the 4 or 5 lines say that you are granted irrevocable, everything that you can think of in your benefit license to use this code, full stop. But you can't claim anything against us, full stop. I mean, it's wonderful. It's a great license to have. The mail gem is released under that, Rails is released under that, almost all the applications are released under that. If it's not released under that license, usually it's under a LGPL license, which is also pretty lenient. You can use it. You just can't sell it like as your own in LGPL. But the license that Rails is under, you could actually take Rails, copy the entire thing, put it on a CD and sell it if you wanted to, and there'd be nothing that anyone could do to you. That's how open it is.
The gems are free?
Everything, well, there are some gems that you can buy, but I actually have never, I've heard they exist. And 3 years I've never needed one or used one. I mean, like, seriously, it's worth, for business people, this is actually quite an important.
Usually something very specific.
Now this is obviously word wrapped, so it fits on a short screen, but normally it goes about this long, and it gives you full license to have whatever you want on that code. So that's actually the license that almost all of the Ruby stuff is released under. And it just means that you don't have any worries about licensing. Any lawyer on earth will be happy with that. That's okay. So, unlike some other languages, which are controlled by an entity, like for example, Oracle right now is talking to Google about licensing some parts of the Java language and making them pay. There's a big story about it. I doubt they'll ever try and license Java itself, but you have these complications that can arise. So Rails, Ruby, all free, use it, it's awesome. The other cool thing about Rails is the entire toolkit, the entire stack is free. So from the programming language to the server that you run it on, which is usually a Linux-based server, that's free, like the source code of that's free. Hosting it with Ninefold is so cheap it may as well be free. And then you've got your database. We normally use the Postgres database, which is also, again, open source and free. So a lot of the tools that we use to create our websites, the licensing is free. So you don't have the situation like you do, say, with .NET, where you need to buy a server license for each web instance you have running, an SQL database server license for each CPU that you have running the server, and all these other things which you need to pay for on a monthly basis. We actually had one client come to us that wanted to rewrite their application into Rails, and I said, oh, why? And they said, well, we'll tell you in a minute, but how much do you think it will cost? And then we went into this whole discussion on how much it would cost, and I said, look, it's going to be about between $200,000 and $400,000, right? And they went, okay, yeah, that's pretty good, that's pretty good. We'd get a return on investment in about 2 years on that, or about a year on that. And I went, what do you mean? And they said, well, if we move it to Rails, we don't have to pay Microsoft the licensing fees. 200 grand in 2 years. Like, wow. Yeah, I mean, it's a big app, but you know, that's a lot of money. And it's money you never recover. So yeah, we haven't quite closed that deal yet. I'm still working on it, touch wood, but we'll see how we go. So once you've got all of that framework and stuff in place, you need to launch. This is another amazingly awesome thing about Rails. What's the scariest thing about launching a new software product out into the world? Is it going to work? You know, or is it going to crash the first user that comes? So one of the things that happens in Rails is that the whole ecosystem and whole community uses this thing called test-driven development. And some of you might have heard about this and some of you might not have. It's also called behavior-driven development, but all these sort of BDD, TDD, different things, they all have 2 Ds in it for some reason. They all mean basically that you test first and then you write the code. So if a client comes to you and goes, we want this feature, right? We need to be able to tag people with number of chickens that they're awesome by or something, right? So the first thing we do as developers is we actually go and write a test. And it's a computer automated test that says, when I go to this home page, I should see a tag link. And when I click that tag link, then it should say how many chickens. And when I select 5, I should see 5 chickens on the page, right? So we write that test. And then we run the test, and it should fail, right? Because we haven't written the feature yet. So it's called test-first development. So once we know we've got a failing feature, we then go and program the code to make it work. And we know we're done when the test passes, right? And this might seem a bit extra workish or counterintuitive, but when you think about it, if you do that for every feature that you write, once you get to the point of launching, you've got maybe 1,000 or 2,000 tests which are making sure your application is operating exactly as it should. And when you get a really big application, when you write a new feature, one of the biggest, scariest things is writing this new feature going to break something else that I don't know about? And we get this a lot in our development cycle. We'll get a new feature, we'll write it out, and then we run the test suite, and the test suite's broken. You know, we've written this feature here and it's broken something randomly over here that no one thought it would break. And this happens all the time. But the cool thing is because we found out about it just after we wrote our code, we can go, oh, I know what that probably is, and you just go and fix it. Whereas if you didn't know that, you then push it to production, 2 days later some user runs into that bug, then that goes through your support help desk, and then a week and a half later it gets back to the developer, and the developer's going, I've got no idea why that's broken. Right? So all of our large websites, we did the online store for the ABC, we wrote their website, so if you've bought any Wiggles toys or Giggle or Hoot, you're welcome. But they sell like, you know, masses of transactions, and they're connected to about 14 external services. I mean, it's a complex website. And we've got thousands of tests on that site. So every time we do an update, we run the tests. And the tests come back and say whether or not it's okay to push live. And if the tests say green, bam, we push it live. So that's a really powerful thing. What it also helps with is, over a period of a development cycle, the speed that you can develop usually does this. As your application gets more complex, every time you make a new feature, it's going to break something, more likely to break something. So as the number of lines of code increase, your speed of development drops. We've got several applications that over 6 months, the development speed has stayed exactly the same. Right? So it's slower at the start because you're writing all the tests, but over the long term, it just stays fairly constant because you can pick up the errors early. And this is a really critical thing. And that helps you with iterating, which is the last step. So once you've launched, it's running, you then come up with a feature or a tweak or something to update. You can write that feature, push it out live, test to make sure it works, and it's up. And that iteration thing is really critical. Rails allows you to do something called continuous deployment. And what continuous deployment is every time you make a change, if the tests pass, it automatically goes live out onto the internet, which is pretty cool. And a lot of sites we deal with do that. Some sites don't, but it works that way. You don't have to do it every time. Like if it's a major feature, you might want to hang on to it for a bit and launch it at a certain time. That's also fine. But little tweaks or updates, you can do it that way. To give you an example of why iteration works really well on Ruby on Rails, when the ABC came to us, they asked us, and this is true because I'm recording it, but they came to us and they wanted us to rewrite their application from .NET to Ruby. They had a 1 to 6 month release cycle. So that's how long it took them from wanting a change and getting it out there. Because the code was quite complex, you know, and there wasn't enough tests around it, and they had to get checked so much and all this sort of stuff. So we rewrote the whole application in about 5 months and then launched it, and now their release cycle is about a day. And you can imagine what a difference that makes to an organization's profitability. I mean, just imagine trying to start preparing for Christmas 3 months ago on the website, right? So it's really a powerful feature of Rails, is continuous deployment. Our reInteractive website sometimes might get updated 15 times in a single day. So we've got a developer working on it. Every time they do a new bit that's ready to go live, we just push it live. And we don't have to wait. It's just like we actually host our Rails website on Ninefold. So every time we merge our code and push it to our source control, which looks after all the code, it just gets redeployed on Ninefold, and it's just live about 3 or 4 minutes later, and that's fine. It just works that way. So you can build your application this way. And if you're in a startup where releasing new features is important to you and keeping ahead of the demand curve of your users is important to you, that's an incredibly powerful feature to have under your belt. And we obviously do that a lot. So we're almost at the end. I know I've gone for about 40 minutes, 50. So how can you learn Rails? If any of you are doing a startup and you're actually like a Java developer or a Python developer or a PHP developer, or you're just starting out, or even if you're a startup and you're looking for a co-founder and you're sort of at the point where you can't quite find one, but you think you're smart enough to try it out anyway, you can actually go and learn Rails and start writing your own startup and start just building it out and just testing some stuff and play with it. It probably wouldn't be something you want to launch live, but it will get you enough of the way there that you can test some ideas, or you can work with people, or You might run into someone while developing that wants to be your co-founder, you know, and all sorts of stuff like that. So the Install Fest runs every month. All of you are welcome to come. The next one's booked out.
And there's a few more spots.
A few more
There's
spots.
4 spots left.
Thank you. You just checked.
I just signed up.
So you can go to the Install Fest. Just go to our community website or speak to Chloe here. She'll tell you where it is, or I will. And we hold that every month. The next one's in
The
after that.
26th of November,
And then after that,
January.
January. We're taking December off. To give you an example of how successful the Install Fest is, we started that in May,
April.
April. She runs it, she knows. And so far we've put 250 people through it. So 250 new Ruby on Rails developers in Australia, which is pretty awesome. Next year we're planning on running it in more locations. We want to get that up to 1,000. And then we've got a whole training program that will help you get more understanding on Rails rolling out next year, where we actually apprentice you all the way to being able to get a job as a developer. But that's all in the pipe works. So I hope I've answered a lot of your questions, and I hope you've got a lot more questions, and I'll be here right now. I'm willing to take some questions, and thank you very much.